How's it going, guys? Today we're going to be going over another LeetCode question. Today our question is from Facebook and it's called Valid Palindrome. Alright guys, so today our question is from Facebook. It's called Valid Palindrome II, and our problem description says, given a non-empty string s, you may delete at most one character. Judge whether you can make it a palindrome. Okay, so pretty simple problem description. We're given a string, we can remove at most one character. We just have to see if that can actually make it a valid palindrome. So in example 1 here, if we're given ABA, we would just return true, right? Because it's actually a palindrome to begin with. We don't actually have to remove any characters. In example 2 here, if we're given ABCA, we would just return true, sorry. And the reason for that is we could delete the character C, for example, and then it would actually become a palindrome. Or, if you actually notice, we could also delete the character B, and it would still be a palindrome because it would read ACA, or if you remove C, it'd be ABA. So either way, it would become a palindrome where we only remove at most one character. So as a note, they also tell us that the string will only contain lowercase characters A to Z, and the maximum length of the string is at most 50,000. Okay, so how do we actually go about solving this? So in the first example, we actually have a string that's already a palindrome, so we definitely know that our structure of our code is probably going to have to validate palindromes, right? So typically with palindromes, the way we validate them is we just have two pointers, I and j, and we check, okay, are the characters at pointers I and j the same? And if they are, we continue and we keep going as long as they're the same. So in this case, the first input ABA, we would check A and A, they would be the same, we move to B, and now the pointers would touch, so we'd be done. So that would validate that it's a palindrome and we wouldn't have to remove any characters. So now let's jump down to example 2, right? How would we actually validate this one? We would have the same approach. We'd have A and A, our pointers I and J. So A and A are the same. Now we'd move our pointers are pointing to B and C. So now B and C are not the same. So this is where we have to ask our question. And our question that we're going to ask is basically, can we remove either of these characters and will that make the string a palindrome? So that's really what our logic is going to boil down to. We're going to have a check that just checks, is this string a palindrome? And while it is, we're going to continue. And then once we reach characters that maybe aren't the same, we're going to ask, hey, if we remove this character, could it become a palindrome? Or if we remove this character, could it become a palindrome? So really what we're basically going to do is write two palindrome checks, right? So anytime, first we're just going to go like this, check. And once the characters aren't the same, we're going to have some other function that also validates that the string is hopefully a palindrome from that little substring that we have left. So let's start doing that. So we're going to have two pointers I and j. So we're going to say int I equals 0, int j equals s.length minus 1. So again, the pointers are starting at the front and the back of the string, and they're just going to move forward while the characters are the same. So we're going to say while I is less than j, right? So while we haven't validated this entire string between pointers I and j, we're going to say if s.char at I is not equal to s.char at j, then we have to ask our question, right, about removing those individual characters. But for now, let's just assume it's okay. We're going to come back to this part. So let's assume that they are the same, right? These two pointers are the same, or the two characters at these pointers are the same. Very simple, right? So this if statement won't trip, and all we have to do is increment I and decrement j, so that the next iteration they're moving inward. Awesome. So now, let's assume that we actually got through this entire while loop, right? Every single character at each of those iterations are the same, like in our first example, ABA. So if that's the case, we simply return true, right? So now let's address the case where they're not the same. So if these two characters are not the same at our two pointers, we said we'd ask a question. Can we remove, let's say, the character at the ith position, and will it make the remainder of the string a palindrome? Or can we remove the character at the jth position, and will removing that character make the remainder of the string a palindrome? So what we could do is we could just return the result of a function asking those two questions. So we can say return, and we're going to write another palindrome checker, so is palindrome, and what we're going to do is we're going to pass the current string we have, and we're going to pass the two indices that we want to check between, right? So we don't want to pass I, right, because we're on I, so we want to simulate removing it. So removing it would really be incrementing it, right? So we're going to say I plus 1, j. So again, that's checking if the string s is a palindrome between the indexes I plus 1 and j. And the reason why we're doing that is because we want to simulate removing that ith character, right? Because it's not the same as the jth character currently. So we're going to pass I plus 1, and then we're going to OR that with the other potential removal, right? Which would be, is this thing a palindrome if we pass s, I, and then j minus 1, right? So if we remove the ith character by going I plus 1, is the remainder of the string a palindrome? Or similarly, if we remove the jth character by decrementing our index, is the remainder of the string a palindrome? Awesome. So now all we have to do is actually write that function. So we're going to say public boolean is palindrome. And we take a string s, we take an integer I and an integer j, and we just do the same kind of check, right? We just say, while I is less than j, if s.char at I, I'm just going to say plus plus so we don't have to do it later. If the character at I plus plus is not equal to s.char at j minus minus. So again, if now we've made those removals, right? We've removed the ith character or the jth character, and we're inside this check, and two characters still aren't the same, then we know it's not possible to remove at most one character, right? So we're going to return false, and that's assuming that both of these calls result in that. It's possible maybe that this function call results in returning false, and then this one returns true. Anyway, so if those two characters are not the same, right, we've already tried removing a character, so we just return false. And finally, if we actually get through this entire while loop now, and all the characters are the same for the remaining substring that we're asking about, we would just return true. So now in runtime, guys, let's talk about that. So here, we're potentially going through the entire string, right? That's like in the first example. The thing is just a palindrome to begin with. But if it's not, we might go through part of the string, and then we might iterate through the remainder of that string twice, right? So still nothing crazy. We're just going through the string at the very most, I would say 3 times, but I don't even think 3 times is totally possible. So that would be 3 of n, right, where n is just the total number of characters in S, and then that would simplify in big O notation to just O of n, where n is the number of characters in S. And then in terms of space complexity, we're not actually declaring any real crazy variables. We don't really have any crazy recursive calls or hash maps or anything like that. So our space would actually just be constant. So I think our runtime would be O of n, where n is the number of characters in our string S, and then I think our space complexity would just be constant, so it would be O of 1. So let's run this code and make sure that it works. Awesome, and it does. So guys, that's how to solve valid palindrome 2 in Java. Again, it's a question that's being asked by Facebook. If you guys enjoyed this video and found it helpful, do me a favor and leave the video a like and subscribe to the channel for more. I'll see you guys next time.